It's Monday. It's Sean Payton time. He's not in the Hall of Fame, will be. I hate to say that's so much pressure on Sean. But he's already coached for 15 years. He's got a Super Bowl. He comes in on Monday. My buddies always say, hey, is Payton coming on this Monday? I'm like, he's missed one Monday. Of course he's coming on. So I want to talk about something. You just brought up a fascinating point that we were talking about Caleb Williams. And it's with Mahomes, we didn't get to see him play college. And It was a small brand. Now we know what Mahomes looks like. Now it's the USC brand. And now it's Caleb Williams. And it's like, whoa. He would be the number one pick now. And you made an interesting point.
Yeah, I think, well, a couple things. It's healthy when we, in scouting, like to say, well, who does he remind you of? And we're not putting that pressure on Caleb saying, oh, you're going to be the next Mahomes. But it's very good when you can say he's like this. Yeah. And so I brought it up yesterday on the show. I think he's a generational player now. I've seen 3 or 4 games, obviously not as much as I would if I was truly doing the evaluation. But at some point, especially with the relationship our league has in gaming now, at some point we're going to move to a lottery system in the NFL. Because this is a player that possibly does that, where at the end of the season, here you are in week, call it 14, 12, and clubs begin to lose to try to put themselves in that position. That's not been a problem to date with our league as we know it. I mean, and it very well could have been. We've had 2 teams that I know lost games.
One of them was to get Jameis Winston.
Tampa Bay, Lovie Smith, great coach, a good friend. And we're losing to the Buccaneers last game of the season. All their starters were pulled. Like, all the linebackers were pulled. And I'm on the headset in the third quarter asking our staff, like, what do you mean Levante David's out? Coach, he's out, such and such. And right away, they were at the 1 spot. Had they won that game, they risked going to the 2 spot, and they wanted to select Jameis Winston. So that actually happened, but it happened at 1 o'clock on a small rating game, and it just disappeared in Tampa, and we never talked about it.
That's right.
Now, last year on a national stage, or 2 years ago, I forget, Philadelphia took out their starting quarterback and put in Nate Sudfeld. And everyone thought, what are they doing in this? And it was on Monday Night Football now, or Sunday Night Football, and that was a problem for the league. And it was a problem because, look, Philly wanted to stick at the 5 or 6 spot. There was nothing that they were playing for. You're always playing for something, though, and you lose a little piece of your locker room when you do that, I think. But this player, I think, is the type of player that we would look back on in 5 years and say, he's why the lottery exists now. Like, who's the worst team? If I said to you, who's going to have the worst record next year?
Well, probably Houston. If Houston decided, Jason said this during the break, we're going to take Will Anderson of Alabama, we're going to go get our generational pass rusher and stink on offense in an offensive league. And then, by the way, warm weather, Caleb Williams running around. You know, I mean, I'm here for it.
It's eventually it's going to happen. Because, look, we weren't tied to the casinos, but as soon as this spreads at 6 and all of a sudden we watch the Eagles at that time or the Buccaneers or another team pull their starters and you're sitting, with a parlay going, that's going to piss some people off.
I think it is. So, speaking of great quarterbacks, so I like Kyler Murray and have defended him. But when you go public with your problems, okay, if I was having problems with my wife, I certainly wouldn't argue with her at a party, okay? When you go public with stuff, the toxicity, people don't want to be around you. So I've had the owner with this franchise in Arizona put an addendum out in the contract to embarrass the player. Now I have the player yesterday ripping the schematics with the coach, and I think, if I'm a coach and Kliff gets fired, I want no part of that. I think they have a real mess on their hands. Is it solvable?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly more of a Rubik's Cube than a simple X and an O thing. I mean, it's pretty complex. It began to become complex when word got out about the contract, the additional. I was a ball boy for this team back and I'm going to date myself, but when the St. Louis Cardinals, before they were the Arizona Cardinals, their training camp was held at Eastern Illinois, where I went to school. And so the early years there in 83, 84, 85, it was Hannafin and then became Gene Stallings.
Yeah.
We'd clean the rooms, bring towels to the rooms. We'd have a summer job.
The Neil Lomax teams?
Neil Lomax had just taken over for Jim Hart. Mr. Bidwell Sr. was the owner at that time, and I think I know that family well enough. And Joe Buck I was 18 or 19, and he was 16. He was there. And then finally, my senior year, I handed out rosters and got to eat with the team, work for the team. So, yeah, I'd like to say this is something that's a one-off, but this repeats itself every year. I mean, it's the teams that aren't having the success they expected. It's frustrating when you lose. Man, you're seeing it in Denver. You're seeing it in New Orleans. Alvin didn't talk to the media yesterday. He had 2 fumbles. He's got all these things build up, and they're magnified when you lose.
Yeah.
And then when you don't, when you have success, it seems to be like the nice spaghetti sauce that covers everything, and it all just tastes good.
I said this watching the Jets yesterday because I didn't want to bench Zach Wilson. And then, Sean, I watched the game, and I thought, Mike White's the better quarterback as a professional.
Yeah. Look,
bigger, accurate.
Obviously, this is the part we never get to see, right? We don't get to see the 7-on-7s during the week, the scout team practice. We don't. And so when the decision was made, hey, we're gonna sit Zach, and then, man, one step further, he's not going to be active. That was unusual, right? And we're going to play this Mike White. I mean, we were like, I'm thinking, why not Flacco? And then we see Mike White, and then I'm like, Google searching Western Kentucky Hilltoppers,
so did I.
Yeah, and that's the insight that they're privy to, or they have, and look,
he's accurate.
Yeah, that was something, and so this guy is in obscurity here, and all of a sudden he's doing the post-game interview with whoever's covering the game. He's won the game ball.
Right.
And so that was a good win for them, and a good time. The timing, I think, was good as well, relative to who they were playing. A lot of things,
went their way.
Yeah, and so, but that's what the head coach does, and I think credit Robert. I mean, that was hey, things like that can energize your team, even when you're winning. I just had this conversation with another team. When you're winning, that doesn't mean everything is just status quo. You're still looking for, hey, how do we improve?
That's right.
And that's a great message and a sign to your whole locker room. And look, it'll be discomforting. It won't be pleasant for Zach, but that'll eventually go down. The medicine will go down, and he'll be better for it.
So I remember when Jordan Love came out, and I called a couple executives who I trust. And they both kind of had the same opinion. He's a little rough. He needs time to develop. He has to refine his game. His mechanics can get a little sloppy, and he's not quite mature enough to run your franchise. Well, now he's 24. He'll be 25 next November. He's moving into adulthood. And I watched him last night. There's something there.
Yeah, and prior to last night, I feel like he's been this, like, almost this figure that none of us know anything about.
Anything.
I don't know how many years it's been since he was drafted first, but we just like, what about Love? And someone got a clever picture last night of Love Hurts.
I saw that.
And I thought that's the photo of the year. I thought he did well with the reps he had last night.
Yeah.
I thought he did very well with the reps he had last night. And sometimes the timing in which you enter, like when you're Mike White, you're entering a situation where you're playing with house money.
Aaron's hurt.
Yeah. And when you're Love coming in, you're behind, like Aaron's injured, it's much more difficult when you enter, and you're in a position where you've been winning and you've got to continue to win. And we saw that in Dallas with their guy earlier in the year. So I thought last night was the first time I was anxious. I mean, we've all been saying, hey, when are we going to see
I couldn't
Love?
wait to see him play.
Yeah, I want to see him. I want to see this car come out of the garage.
Right.
And we saw it a little bit. We kind of liked it.
Yep. I want to talk about Sean Payton's joining us for our radio listeners. I want to talk about the Niners because it was an ugly game, and you can tell the good teams in this league, they don't play well and they win. That's when you're good. When you just know by the second quarter the game plan's not great, guys, we just got to pick up. You had some breeze teams like that. You figure out a way to win.
Yeah.
Niners had one of those. Jason said something earlier. They are 1985 physical. Like almost on the edge of being. That's a little bit.
I love it.
So you love it.
Yeah, I do, because I think it's hard. Look, our practice times are reduced. The padded opportunities are reduced. All of these things in the off season are reduced. Training camp, all of it, right? And so, man, you feel that team when you watch them. I mean, you see it. It's coaching. It's also the players. And I know it wasn't aesthetically pleasing maybe for a lot of people relative to the 49ers, but I would argue defensively,
it's brilliant.
Their confidence yesterday, they were talking about a shutout. That was very much on their mind. Mind you, the first shutout the Saints have had since
21 years ago.
Since I don't know when, 2001. They've never been shut out. And so I know that they've got to clean some things up offensively. The hardest thing as a head coach when you go in there, you're Kyle, you're the play caller. You're in charge of moving the ball and scoring touchdowns. You have to be able to go into that locker room and celebrate that win, which I'm sure he did, and celebrate the dominance of how they play defensively. That is going to serve you well later. And so it wasn't the perfect game that we wanted to see because the scoring was down. But, man, it's the perfect game if I'm a 49ers fan and I understand that I'm going to have to play this Eagle team to get where I want to go, or I'm going to have to play this Cowboy team. I think they're one of the best teams in the NFC, and I think they can win the Super Bowl.
So do I. I want to talk about, because Drew Brees did this and you did this a lot. There are just certain people. I remember spotting fairly early, about year 4 or 5 with Eli Manning, and it was about the time he won a Super Bowl. I was like, boy, he's good in the 2-minute drill. Some guys, the DNA, whatever, Russell Wilson for years in Seattle. It was almost like he was better late than he was early.
Yeah.
And I'm watching Justin Herbert win another fourth quarter comeback. He hasn't had Mike Williams. Keenan Allen was there yesterday. O-line missing his left tackle. He's had cluster injuries all over the offense. He's got a defensive head coach. There are some things working against him. But there is something about the way he plays. And I want you to kind of go into the brain of Brees and you late. I find sometimes Herbert is better late. Burrow's got a little bit of this too.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and I would agree with it.
Urgency.
Yeah, and there's a more spontaneous flow to the game. When we watch the World Cup tomorrow, there's an ebb and flow. There's no plays. I'm not sending in, hey, winger right, kick it left. Or there's a flow to that, and some of that exists a little bit more in the 2-minute that doesn't exist when we collect ourselves, huddle up, change personnel, go out to the line of scrimmage, call a play, run a play, huddle up again. The same personnel's on the field. There's probably 7 or 8 routes, a couple handoffs, and a screen.
And that's what you use in the 2-minute drill.
That's what we use. And so, look, when you get with someone who's really good, and I was with Brees, man, he was the best in that, sit back and watch it happen. In other words, I'm going to beep in. I've got the remote, but I'm going to beep in when clock stops. In other words, occasionally I might say, Drew, heads up for whatever, or be it. But he's going, his mind is thinking, and then let's say the pass is incomplete. Boom, we huddle. All right, here's a thought. Tell me if you like it. If not, get right back to one of your plays. He's got one of the 8 plays that he likes, and he might just look at me and say, I'd like something else, or he might like something. So when we have the meeting the night before games, we would look at our 2-minute call sheet. He would dot the 4 he likes out of double, and he'd like the 4 he likes out of trips, and then maybe 3 or 4 from empty with the same personnel. And so we kind of have an outline versus this defense and what they do defensively in the 2-minute of what he wanted to call. And then right beneath that, we had huddle calls that had the same personnel that were in the plan in other areas, but we could access them right there without changing bodies.
Right.
So, yeah, I think, look, that's a good sign for a young player to be that comfortable in it because he's still young, and to watch him. And
I thought Trevor Lawrence yesterday was better in those hurry-up offenses.
Yeah, and so now it's just got to be – it can't be all the time because there is a downside defensively. We saw this with Chip Kelly.
You're right.
Everything that, that was the new rage. We're gonna get 100 plays off, and the whole time your defense is struggling, your time of possession,
right,
all of that. So there's a balance. But man, we had 2 walk-off 2-pointer wins yesterday. We had a walk-off overtime run. It was interesting the finishes that both teams we saw win going for 2. I thought the Chargers' 2-point play was fantastic.
Yeah,
I want to look at that clip again. Joe Brady. What am I saying? Joe Lombardi.
Yeah.
Just a little fly motion, and it was just kind of a little stick in, with a vertical release.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that easy. So when I see a play like that, I say play, not player, right?
That's right.
High release point by the QB, good drive by those guys, and an exciting win for them. And as fun as that was, we go back to Phoenix, and we had the crisis back there we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
We were this close away from that being flipped.
Right. Well, that's the league.
That's the league.
I want to talk about Jim Harbaugh was in the NFL for a while. He can rub people the wrong way. I once had a disastrous interview with him live, and we decided to just hang up. He's different. He's intense. But I do tend to think that when I see a really good coach, the team becomes the coach. Vrabel's teams are tough. Belichick's resourceful and smart. Andy's clever. Yours clever. You become a part of the personality. And I watch Michigan this weekend, and I'm like, they're a little bit like Harbaugh. Wildly competitive, almost over-the-top intense, physical. Not gifted, physical. And I watch him, and I'm like, do you remember coaching against Jim?
Yeah, listen, he's a really good coach. University of San Diego. We worked with the Raiders as an assistant, Stanford, and he eventually makes his way to the 49ers, and probably our most difficult loss that I can think of in 2011. Our best team in New Orleans played the 49ers back at Candlestick. Alex Smith was a quarterback. It throughout the course of that game was fairly low scoring, and in the last 4 minutes, I think 4 touchdowns were scored, and the momentum just went back and forth, and it was Sproles, and then it was the 49ers, and then it was frickin' Jimmy Graham scores, and then they score with 28 seconds, and they win this game and end up losing to the Giants, and our matchup with the Giants we thought was such a good one. And then the Super Bowl team they had with Kaepernick. Look, I know Jim. I know his brother John Moore because John and I worked together at Philadelphia, but they come from a head coach's family, Jack Carr, and so he's a football coach. They had an outstanding day the other day, and it was a culmination of a number of years. It took a while.
Absolutely.
But there it was, and they're clearly one of the teams. Look, the thing about it for me, my son's at TCU, and he's a student assistant. They're at 4. Probably going to go to 3. I don't know how this all works.
So they'll open up with them.
But there's a chance they're playing Michigan, and then I can't stand Harbaugh if that's the case. Then I'm with, I don't want to do the interview with him. But I like him. I think he's good. He's not for everyone, but a lot of these guys aren't. And that doesn't matter. Ultimately, it was a great weekend because, look, we went through a stretch. It was interesting when they showed the head coach's history. That rivalry has been in clumps of 5 or 6.
Yes,
and then chances are, if you were the other coach, you probably got fired. So the 5 or 6,
right.
They're just clumps. And it's such an important game to those 2 universities and such an important game to the alumni. And look, I sat next to Charles Woodson and walked in like he was just on cloud 9. Yeah, so good for Michigan.
By the way, you said before we let you go, you said a couple weeks ago, you said, I don't know if you said it to me on the air or off, but you said, I kind of like some of the Raiders pieces. That's an interesting team. And to your point, back-to-back weeks, that's not over the course of 10 years, the Benson family. It's not been well run. You didn't have a Mickey Loomis. This rebuild is not a 9-game rebuild.
Yeah, that's right. And so
I was happy for him yesterday.
I was too. Who has that vision? Who has that vision forward to look at the incremental gains that maybe we don't all get to see? We have to fight Manic Monday, right? I mean,
Right.
and look, we love Monday. There's so much to discuss. But I think it's important, and not everyone can do this, look clearly at the ship and say, are we heading in the right direction, or are we heading to an iceberg?
Right. And the Raiders just found a way. Tough place to play.
Calm waters right now.
Feeling good.
Yeah.
They should.
Calm waters.
Yep. Sean, it's great seeing you as always.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.